Hello, welcome back. Fifth session. Sadly, we've only got one more after today, but this has been an awesome series so far. Please give Shayan and the Sui team some love on Twitter. And I've also posted the link to the session materials again in the chat. So please follow along there. And I think that's pretty much it from me. So Shayan, you can take it away now.
Awesome. Will do. So, hello everyone. Welcome to now the fifth of 6 sessions that we have hosted now. So, yeah, I think it's awesome. It feels like time flew. I remember when I first gave the first one, I was like, "Oh my god, like that's like more than a month ago now." But yeah, so pretty much like everything that we've been learning up to now, I feel has like prepared us well to now actually like do something intuitive, we like the first session, if you recall, we learned about just like an overall like overview of what the Sui network is. In the second session, we learned about how we can actually like we wrote our first Sui move code, right? We actually like got into the functions, some of the syntax. In the third session, we talked about objects because we discovered that Sui is a very object centric has a very object centric programming model. So everything revolves around objects. And as a result, we really dive deep into those. And in the fourth session, we talked about dynamic fields. We learned how, yeah, objects are like super awesome and all right, but how can we take their functionality to the next level? So in this session now, and now the fifth session, we'll talk about how we can create an on-chain RPG, a role-playing game. So if you're new here, my name is Shayan. I am a DevRel engineer here at the Sui Foundation. And if you're a repeat member, then you already knew that. Well, anyways, thank you so much for joining, and let's jump right into it. So why a gaming example? So like right off the bat, I'm going to admit that I'm not a big gamer myself. I don't really play like when I was younger, yes, I used to play a bunch of Pokemon. Like this is an Oblivion meme. I played a bunch of Oblivion growing up. So I'm not like so again, I'm not a big gamer, but I still believe that games are very intuitive to understand because more or less we all played games growing up. Even if we didn't have like an Xbox or a PlayStation or whatever, like I know I would just play a bunch of Flash games online. And the reason why I want to go over like why I want like the project to be like a game beside as opposed to like a blockchain type contract like a CLOB or an AMM is because I still believe if you're like really like beginning to learn about blockchain or programming in general, talking about like these advanced like financial concepts can be almost very like out there. It doesn't make really sense. And they're not too intuitive in my opinion. And like again, I'm not a psychologist nor like a game historian, but games and in particular RPGs in my opinion have a very like intuitive approach to how you like own items, like in-game items, how you level up because it's very similar to like how we live in real life. But of course, games can be much more fun in real life. And like in Elder Scrolls, like in Oblivion for example. So up until now, games have traditionally been programmed via a Web 2 tech stack because the Web 3 tech stack could not really support games, like fun games, really en masse. Because up until now, if you ask me, games on blockchain, like GameFi, for for example, has been more focused on like the fi part than the game part. It's almost like as up until now, blockchain games have been about money and the game was kind of just like there on the side. The game just kind of got there. The game was never really like the sole focus. But really with Sui's technology, in particular with Sui's technology, we can really take web3 gaming to the next level. So with that said, let's jump right into it. So in this RPG, we'll be going over objects, events, the game initialization, the gameplay, our inventory, object creation, and game integrity slash link checks, kind of like ensuring that our game is right. So our game will cover these structs and functions. And yeah, let's jump right into it. Game time. So, as always, this code is available on the GitHub repository, and I just want to make it clear that I got this particular code example from the Mist and Labs example repository. So if you want to follow along, this is in like the code repo that Angela sent, or you could go to this link here from the actual like Sui's actual GitHub repository. But if you want to get started as well, in a new terminal, enter Sui move new on-chain RPG. So we'll just call this particular game Hero. But yeah, populate the file with these following imports. And let's jump right into objects. So what are the objects that we're going to talk about in our game? So probably the biggest object, or like the most well-known object that you might have imagined or like thought, is like our actual playable character, right? So our actual hero, the hero that we'll be using to slay boars, drink potions, is an object itself. So again, just to reiterate, that means if you like look at your account from like the Sui wallet, for example, this would be like an NFT technically, because this hero is still in your wallet as an NFT. So this is our playable character. It has hit points, XP, a sword option. So again, this means the hero can either have no sword or have one sword, and game ID. So you might be thinking, what's the difference between like the first ID field, UID, which every object needs to have, and just ID? So all objects in this game have a game ID field. So I'm only going to talk about hero, but I won't like cover all the I won't talk about it again for the other ones. And it is important to mention that this ID is separate from UID, which every object has to have. So ID just has copy, drop, and store. It doesn't have key. This means it's not guaranteed to be globally unique. Anybody can create an ID from a UID from an object, and IDs can be freely copied and dropped. So here, the values are not globally unique because there can be multiple values of type ID with the same underlying bytes. So for example, if you were to call object :ID on an object, you can call that as many times as you want and get as many IDs as you want for a given object, and each ID value will be identical. And that's exactly what we want here. Because anybody can spin up their own instance of this game, we want to make sure that our particular assets for our game are going to be constant for all of them. So that's why you'll see every object has this game ID field, which is just the ID of the game the user is currently playing. So then we'll talk about the sword. So again, you'll see it has the same game ID field. Not going to talk about it again, but it also has the magic and strength fields. So magic is a multiplier of strength, and our sword strength increases as we slay enemies. So you'll also see that our sword has key and store. And it has key again because it's an object. It can exist as a top level object on the Sui network, and it has store. Why does it have store again? And I'm here to remind you that it has store because we literally are storing sword inside the hero object. So if we were to omit store, our code wouldn't work. It needs to have store as well. So this is our potion for healing our hero after their arduous feats. As you can see, the most notable field here is its potency, which is the effectiveness of the potion. So this is essentially going to be how much HP this potion heals. And this is the boar object. And again, like everything in Sui is an object, and so is the boar. So the creature that the hero can slay to increase their strength is this boar. So as you can see, the boar has its hit points and strength of itself. And then game info. And as the comment says, it's an immutable object that contains information about the game admin, and it's only created once, so it can't be falsified. So this is the only object in our game that does not have the game ID field. Why? Because it's simply the same as its UID. So for example, anytime that you saw game ID here, essentially the same UID of game info that was copied. So anytime we want to like check to make sure if this asset, this object in our game is valid, we essentially obtain that ID from this game info. And then finally, the last object is the game admin, or you can think about it as the game admin capability. So also one thing to note here is that this is going to be our first time seeing a capability with other fields besides UID, but it doesn't change anything. Because in this game, or in our game, only admins can create bores and potions, it makes sense to store this under the game admin capability. So anytime the admin does create a bore or a potion, that field will be incremented by 1. But again, so just because it has other fields, it doesn't really change anything. You can still use this game admin object as a gate, like to gate admin access. So now let's talk about events in our game. But wait, what are events? We haven't covered these yet. Events are important for SweetMove smart contracts as they're the main way for indexers to track actions on chain. And this is analogous to server backends. So we only have one event in this game, and it is the boar slain event. So the type representing an event, as you can see, has the abilities copy and drop. And events aren't representing assets, and we're only interested in the data they contain, so they can be duplicated, hence copy, and they can be dropped at the end of scopes, hence drop. So it's essentially, we're not like mocking money, we're not like mocking like a hero's abilities. Therefore, it's not important for us to have this as an object, right? That's why it just has copy drop. We're just interested in the information. And to emit an event in Sui, you just need to use the Sui event emit method, and we'll see this in the slay function. And then again, these are just some rudimentary constants: upper bound on player HP, upper bound on magic, and the minimum sword cost. And then these are just some error codes. So if the boar won, if the hero's tired, aka the hero has 0 HP, and so on and so forth. So now let's talk about the game initialization. So as you can see, we split the game initialization into 2 functions. We have this init function, which, as you remember, is automatically called once the module is published. And we have the new game function, which means that, okay, what this means is that as soon as our module is published, it calls init, aka it creates a new game. But if we want to create like multiple games in the future, so like let's say I upload this contract, but you want to create your own game, you'll be able to call this too. So anybody will be able to permissionlessly call their own game. But this is just saying, okay, so the first time it's called, you don't have to manually call a new game. It's just automatically called for you. So what is this create function? It's this. So as you can see, this is going to be, so let's first talk about the first few lines, right? We see that the second line of this function, we say let ID equals object : new. And then the next line, let game ID equals object : UID to enter. As you can see, we freely copied that UID and we created an ID. And then you'll see the next chunk is the freeze object call. So this is the first time we're seeing a practical example of the freeze object function. This is because anybody can use this game info, but not be able to mutate it. And you might remember that the biggest thing from game info is, well, the ID that we'll be duplicating in the other objects and the admin. So who's the address? What's the address that's calling this function? And then game admin uses object : new to generate a new ID, as well as reuses game ID from game info. And remember, this is just a reminder that you can do this and it's perfectly legal. So we're calling object : new because we're instantiating the new object, and we're reusing game ID just to remind ourselves, not even to remind ourselves, but to say like, okay, this belongs to this game. So now let's jump into gameplay. So this is probably like the bulk of this game, the slay function, right? This is a pretty rudimentary game. Right now, we're only interacting with NPCs, the boar in this case. So let's break it down into smaller chunks first. So first, we need to check to make sure both the hero and the boar objects being pulled into this game match the ID of game info. Yeah, because if we go back, you'll see that it takes three parameters excluding the transaction context, right? The game info, the hero, and the boar. So first you're going to check to make sure that both the game ID of the hero and the boar match that of the game itself. Then we're going to destructure the boar object. Then we get the strength of the hero and the HP of the hero and the boar, sorry. And then this while loop is the main logic of this function, and it essentially simulates a battle between the hero and the boar. So once the hero and the boar do their thing, we update the hero's HP. Then the hero gains experience and the sword gains strength. We emit the boar slain event in the event that we actually do slay the boar. And then we finally delete the boar ID. The boar object no longer exists. And we'll see this in the next session. So in the next session, we'll actually play this game. You'll see that once a hero, if you create a new boar, you can see it on the Sui Explorer. Then once you slay it, if you type in that same object in, it'll no longer be there. And we'll, like I said, we'll see that next session. And yeah. So again, this is the hero strength, level up sword, and sword strength functions. So the first one is just a function to determine a hero's strength. So if the hero has 0 HP, they have 0 strength. And then you see that hero strength is a function of the hero's XP, HP, and the sword strength if they have one. And then level up sword, pretty straightforward. It simply increments the sword strength by the amount after every battle. And sword strength is just a simple getter function. So now let's talk about inventory. So what are some of the items that our hero can have? So we can have the heal function. So the heal function, again, does exactly what it says it's going to do. That's why I love this game example, because again, I think it's so straightforward. So as you can see, when you call this heal function, you actually have to have this potion object in your possession. And again, if we talk about the function signature, we have a mutable reference to hero because we'll be increasing the hero's HP, and we're passing in potion by value because we'll be deleting the potion object by the end of it. So yeah, first, again, the first line is the assert. We want to make sure that the hero and the potion both have the same game ID, meaning they both belong to the same game instance. Then we destructure the potion, actually called delete on the potion ID. And then we increment the hero's new HP by the potency. And then because we have that max HP to avoid the integer overflows, we have this function at the end where we take math double colon, we take the minimum essentially between what the hero's new HP would be and the max HP, just to make sure we can't go over it. So essentially, the potency is just added to your HP and the potion is deleted. So equip sword calls option swapper fill, which essentially adds a sword to the hero if the hero doesn't have one, and returns the old sword if there is one. And that's essentially the swapper fill function, period. Excuse me. It's a little sick from Denver. And yep, remove sword, I think, is pretty straightforward. Disarms the hero by returning their sword, and aborts if it doesn't have a sword. So now let's talk about object creation. So we talked about the objects. Now how are they initialized and instantiated? So create sword. So as this comment says, it all starts with the sword. So how does it work? We take game info, coin, like the actual Sui in our balance, and then transaction context, of course, because we're generating a new object. So if we want to create a new hero, or first to create the sword, right? So when we want to create the sword, we first have to transfer funds to the admin. And you can see that on line 13, when we call transfer payment to game.admin. And then we mint the sword. We mint the sword, and we do not send it to the hero yet. We don't send it to the user yet. We simply just return the sword. Then we call create hero, because again, every hero needs to have, when we create our hero, it has a sword to begin with. So when we call create hero, same thing. It returns hero. First, we check to make sure that the game ID matches the sword, and then we equip our hero with that sword. And again, I think it's important to note to see that we are passing in sword by value, not by mutable reference. We're passing it by value because we are actually transferring this sword to the hero. We're wrapping it in the hero. And then this is the public entry function now, right? Acquire hero. So anytime you want to acquire your hero for the first time, you first have to acquire the sword, then the hero, and then we transfer this hero object to the actual transaction, to the sender of the function. So send potion. So as you can see, only an admin can create a potion with the given potency for recipient. So it's important to first keep in mind that this creates and sends a potion to an address, not to the hero itself. So again, as you can see, all we do first is we call check ID to make sure that the ID of the game matches that of the admin, because we don't want any admin from another game to be able to create potions. We increment admin.potions created by 1, and then we simply we instantiate the new potion with the given potency, and we transfer it to the player. And this is also the first time that we're seeing the game admin cap without just the underscore, right? Because before we just use right now the game admin is our game admin cap. Before it was just an underscore, colon, and it was only a read-only reference to the game admin cap. But because now our game admin cap has 2 functions, right? It both provides that admin gate to this function, and we're using it to keep track of all the potions we're creating. So as a result, we're not passing in a read-only reference, we're passing in the mutable reference. And then very similar here, instead of creating a potion now, we're creating a boar. And again, we have to pass in HP and strength now besides potency, but everything else is still the same. We first check the ID to make sure the admin and the game both belong to the same game instance. We increment the boar's created value by 1, and then we initialize and transfer the boar object to the player's address. And again, this goes to the address, not to the actual hero itself. And as you might have, if you remembered in slay, for example, if you go back to the slay function right here, you'll see that we actually need the boar in our wallet. We need the boar under our address to be able to call this. So we'll need to be able to pull in the boar from our list of possible objects, which is why it goes to our address and not the hero itself. Now we were here. So game integrity / links checks. So as you saw throughout the game, let me just make sure I didn't skip anything. Yeah. So as you saw throughout the game, we did a bunch of checks to make sure that the boar or the potion and the hero or whatever all belong to the same game instance, right? So this is what the first function check ID does. It essentially makes sure that the ID of game info is the same as the ID we're passing in, which was like hero.gameID, for example. And then the second function is simply just this ID function. It's a simple getter function. And yeah, that was pretty much it for today. This was a more brief video. I know the other ones were longer, but yeah, in the next session, we'll get to actually publishing our module and first testing it, publishing it, and then interacting with it. So again, the biggest takeaway from this is feel free to look at the actual repo to see how you can create your own games potentially. And I think that this is going to be huge, especially after the next lesson where we learn how to test our own code, publish it, and interact with it. So before we end the presentation, as you know, let's talk about what's next. So the next workshop is our project showcase, Launch an RPG Part 2. And I just mentioned that we'll be going over testing, publishing, and calling. And that'll be next Friday. So not this upcoming Friday, but next Friday. And also our Sui Vietnam Builder House is coming up from March 18th through 19th. And if you'll be in the area, please do sign up, especially if you're attending these sessions. I think you'll get a lot out of it because I think a lot, if not all of us from the Sui Foundation will be there, and it'll be a great chance to be able to like connect with both other builders in the ecosystem and with us. So definitely feel free to register using this link below. And yeah, as always, we have our survey and our questions. So these surveys are super important because it shows us what we're doing right, what we could use, what we could do to do better. And yeah, your feedback is super helpful and it's super appreciated. We actually do read it. So it's super important that you guys do these. And of course, I'll now open the floor to any questions. Thank you so much again. Okay, so I see Dev asked, how can an object reference constants in the main program? It was my understanding modules only get access to its own data. Okay, so yeah, I mean, if we go back to where I think this is your question at least. If we go back to here we go. Yeah, so how can an object reference constants? Well, they'll just be pulled in. The object won't necessarily, like, we don't necessarily use these constants in the objects, right? We use these in the functions. So like, for example, when we called the heal function, if we go to that, so keep in mind, this is the constant max HP. This isn't that same model. Then when we call the heal function, you'll see that the last line of this function, we essentially take the hero's HP to be either the minimum between the new HP or the max HP. Essentially, this is just saying if the new HP after drinking the potion goes above 1000, to cap it at 1000. Just have it as max HP. Too Fun asks, does init work on first publish only or each time we update it? I'm not sure actually, because I don't think yeah, I'm not sure because I haven't actually like published or updated a package ever publishing yet. Okay, Deb asked, what is the life cycle of the Sui object? After a boar is killed, how is the object depreciated? Did it cost money to create the object? Who gets the money after the boar object is deleted? Who can delete it? So let's go to that. Let's go to the slay function. Yes, so it costs money to create the object, right? That's essentially the gas fees that we pay. And then this is actually still being like, we're still talking, not we, but the Mist and Labs team is still talking about how object rebates will work. So how you can possibly get some of your money, some of your Sui back after you delete the actual object. And so in this case, who gets the money after the boar is deleted? That'll be the person calling the slave function. And then who can delete it? You can only update an object if you own it, right? So like when I send this boar to another address and that hero slays the boar, the hero slaying the hero slaying the boar, or the address, the account that's slaying the boar can delete it. Ooh, this is a good question. So after killing the boar, what if it has a 5% chance to drop boar meat? How would this be implemented? So if you look at the CAPI code, and I talked about the CAPIs last time, right, with respect to dynamic fields, if you went on the website, because I didn't talk about this too much, but if you went on the CAPI website, capi.art, yeah, if you went on capi.art, you could see that you could breed two CAPIs together, right? And the cool thing is that this breeding actually does take into account mutations, like gene mutations, for example. And gene mutations, as you know, do not have a 100% chance of occurring. There is that randomness aspect added onto it. So you're essentially asking, how do we implement randomness into the blockchain, into our codes? And the Mist and Labs team is actually developing this right now. I do not know if it's live yet, but I know that something like that will be live soon, where you can have randomness essentially on chain. So what does object deletion mean? Do we wipe out the content? If so, do we get back what we paid when creating it? Let's say it was a huge object. So yeah, this is still like the right slide, right? Where we delete the boar ID. So if you go in the Sui Explorer, like let's say you generate an NFT. Like let's say we have code where we create our own NFT. and we can look up the NFT in our wallet, right? It has this unique UID. So we can like go on the Sui Explorer, type in that UID, and get that literally non-fungible token, right? Because only one of that NFT exists and will ever exist. We can look it up. If there's a function in that same module that deletes that NFT object, it literally like deletes that ID. So if we like copy and paste that ID into the Sui Explorer again, we'll get an error saying that no such object exists. And then yeah, with regards to the rebate, like object deleting rebates, I think that's still being worked out at the moment. Okay, Dev asked, okay, so assuming the hero object is stored with the player, should boar also be stored with the player or could it be stored with the program? I.e., what if there's multiple players all interacting with the same boar? Who would own the object? Yeah, I mean, this was just the rudimentary uh like way to do it. So, for example, another like just thinking about your question right now, we saw, let me go back to this, right? So, yeah, let's say we have game info, right? So let's say we did something such that when we initialize game info, it was a shared object instead of an immutable object. If it was a shared object, we could do something like sending every boar to this shared object, right? So we can like almost think of like a field of boars, right? And if you want to slay a boar, you can then slay a boar that doesn't belong to you. So, and yeah, let's go to that actual snippet, right? I believe that yeah, that'll be here. So again, in this case, game info is a immutable object. We call freeze object because we're only allowed to get read only references. But if we want to have something like a field of boars where anyone can like freely slay a boar, I think that would be the way to go. Where then game info is then a shared object or something similar. Maybe even if you want to be more like particular, maybe you could like create another object called um, boar field or like spawning location, something like that, right? Or anytime, like an admin, for example, can call this function as many times as they want, create a new boar, or like maybe with dynamic fields, even they would attach that boar object via dynamic field to that boar field. And then, like in our game, let's say anytime like where like actual hero walking goes up to boar to slay it, we'll actually take that dynamic field object and delete it like that. So in that case, who would own the boar object? Who would own the object? No one. It would be a shared object. So like no one technically. No one slash everyone. Okay. So GCB asked, how do you start to build a smart contract? You first write the test in pseudocode, or how do you attack this problem? So I think this is we'll cover this in the next session, because in the next session we will actually go over testing, because we haven't talked about testing at all. So the next session we will talk about like testing Sui Move code in general, and then testing this particular piece of code. We'll publish it and then we'll interact with it. Samyak asked, is there a Sui builder house happening in India? So as of now, there are no Sui builder houses happening in India. I believe the last time a link was sent to the Sui Foundation blog, that does have an up-to-date list of all the builder houses occurring. And I think that's the best resource to use before any other like official updates. And yeah, I think that's all the questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Shayan, again for another wonderful session. So we have one more coming up, don't we? And that will be the very last one. And it is also part
I'm
2.
Gonna cry. I'm going to cry. Don't remind me.
It will be a sad day, but it will be exciting because everyone here will know a bit more about Sui and hopefully go on to play around and build some awesome things. So we can look forward to that.
No, yeah, because I think the final session does. Well, at least I hope it'll do a good job of like kind of like wrapping up everything we've learned, like to like the calm, like okay, like this is it. Now you're free, do your own thing. Like, yeah.
Exactly. So thank you everyone again. Stay tuned for reminders about the next session, and I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of the day. Cool.
Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. I'll see you next Friday. Bye-bye.
Bye.